So if you have never been part of this format before, essentially what I do is I post a list of various topics on Twitter, and I'll do a poll, and whichever topic wins is what I talk about every Saturday morning. So today we are going to talk about back up today we're going to talk about placebo and nocebo. So if you're watching on YouTube, I do stream on periscope.tv/scientistmel. So if you have the app, you can interact there. And so today we're going to talk about what placebo and nocebos are, because it's a real thing, and it's something that scientists have to contend with when doing drug studies. So let's pop over here. So essentially, placebo. It's used primarily in scientific drug studies to compare the effects of a drug versus something that's just a sugar pill. Now, this is a very, very important thing to do, because this is a way for scientists to be able to say, okay, yes, this drug does something, or no, it doesn't do anything. So you need something that's called a control group. So that's what a placebo does. Now, there is something called the placebo effect, which is something that is psychological. So when people take a particular thing, if they think they're part of a study, then they start, it's like, oh, I feel better. That's something called the placebo effect. So we're going to explore that a bit today. Now, the other thing that we want to talk about is the nocebo effect. Now, a lot of people don't understand that, well, they don't know that this is actually a thing. This, too, is a psychological effect. So when somebody has a nocebo effect, their symptoms tend to be a bit worse. They can be worse, and they might actually have side effects from a sugar pill, to where they think that they're experiencing side effects. So health issues are related to expectations, and so this can also affect side effect data for drug studies. So somebody who is on a placebo that reports side effects, you're like, hold on, you know, what's going on here? So let's pick this apart a little bit. So some of you might be familiar with Ben Goldacre. He's pretty cool. I've been reading his book called Bad Science, and if you haven't checked it out, you totally should. He goes into the placebo effect a lot. You never saw this one coming. So he's actually in medical science and works a lot with research and picks apart studies. So he does a lot of similar things in regards to looking at whether or not particular drug treatment should be used on the general population. And so he says the placebo effect is one of the most fascinating things in the whole of medicine. It's not just about taking a pill and your performance and your pain getting better. It's about our beliefs and expectations. It's about the cultural meaning of a treatment. So there's lots of different studies that have been involved with this. So I'm going to talk about a few of these. So this effect is substantial. Patients who are told, if you take this drug, you should experience some kind of symptom relief in regards to your drug. So patients who are thinking that they're getting a new treatment to reduce symptoms or cure them can experience a sense of wellness and feeling better. The placebo is not the same mechanism as a drug treatment or a cure, and the placebo and nocebo effect is psychological. So if you've not read his book, Bad Science, it's actually available on audiobook as well. He talks a lot about this, and he talks also about alternative medicine and homeopathy, which actually rely heavily on the placebo effect. So let's talk a bit about homeopathy. It's involved a lot with alternative meds, and so I did a whole show just on pseudoscience. And so when you're talking about placebo effect, we can see this heavily in homeopathy and alternative medicine. So these expectations are linked to wellness. So if I take this particular vitamin or I drink this particular fluid, I should feel better. So people are told what to expect, and they feel better once they take it. So it's not to say that people, people associate, well, I'm doing homeopathy and I feel better. Well, that might be psychosomatic. It is, to be quite blunt, it is psychosomatic. There's no actual drug interaction involved when it comes to homeopathy or alternative medicine, but people still feel better. And that's kind of where we see placebo effects outside of medicine. So let's talk about the science of it. All right, let's talk about this science. This particular guy works at Harvard. He's a professor in regards to medical science. He spent a long time studying the placebo effect. And this study is interesting in that he did a study involving acupuncture and IBS. And so he worked with, I believe it was about 200 different patients, and he had them. The study involved some patients sitting in a waiting room, some patients just receiving the treatment, and some patients with extra care given by the practitioner. And so this is an interesting study in that practitioners who spent more time giving extra care and doting on their patients had patients report comparable relief compared to that of standard IBS medications. So there's something to be said in how a practitioner or how a doctor interacts with his patients. Those patients that got extra attention actually fared better than those who just received the treatment alone. So that makes it a substantial study in regards to doctor care. Now let's talk about the nocebo effect. Where we see the other side to this in regards to side effects. This can have two different kinds of effects. Individuals may have their symptoms worsen, so they may be taking a sugar pill and feel like my symptoms are getting worse for my disease. What am I going to do? And some patients might actually have side effects from this particular thing. Bedside manner has a real effect, and yes, it does. So with the placebo, bedside manner has a lot to do with how well your patients are. There's science to promote that. So with nocebo, individuals can experience side effects even though they're not, actually they might actually experience side effects if they're told about it. I'm going to talk about a study here in just a second, which is pretty interesting. So I thought this was a funny gif if you've watched Scrubs. If you've not seen that show, it is pretty funny. So it's both psychosomatic involving side effects. So let's talk about the science behind that on a study that was done. So there was one study done where 120 benign prostate hyperplasia patients, essentially the prostate was swelling, and so it wasn't a cancer or anything like that. So these particular patients were given finasteride, which reduces prostate gland swelling, and one of the side effects associated with that is erectile dysfunction and lower libido. So some of the patients were told what the side effects were, and some patients weren't told what the side effects were. So what they found out is that 44% of patients who were told about the side effects reported erectile dysfunction and low libido, as opposed to 15% of patients who were not told about side effects reported erectile dysfunction and low libido. So having that information actually can have an effect on whether or not you present side effects or not for a particular study. Both groups were given the actual drug. So I should point out, it wasn't a placebo study. Both groups were given the drug, but the people who were told about the side effects had a higher amount reporting the actual side effects. Substantial. Worth taking note. So, how do we go about dealing with the placebo and nocebo when it comes down to what do we do about this? How do we make certain that the medications that we're giving people, do have these pronounced side effects for accurate data? Well, let's say patients who are made aware of side effects as well as whether or not they're taking the actual drug can skew these results in drug studies. So, what do? Double-blind studies. Double-blind studies reduce these effects. So let's learn the difference between single-blind studies and double-blind studies. So a single-blind study is essentially the researchers know who's getting the placebo and who isn't. Double-blind studies mean the doctors and the patients have no idea who's getting what. Now, why is that significant? Why is it important that it's just, that it isn't just the patients who don't know, but also the doctors? Because double-blind studies eliminate chances of doctors and patients skewing data from disclosing side effects, as well as placebo administration. So what does that mean essentially? It means essentially, if I can get this up here, sorry, wrong one. It means essentially that doctors' behavior towards patients can still instill a placebo effect on individuals, and just from attention to care. And it also, doctors sometimes can mess up, and they can actually disclose side effect information, or they can disclose whether or not a patient is getting the drug or the placebo. So double-blind studies completely eliminate the possibility of whether or not a patient will learn about the side effects and whether or not a patient will learn on whether or not they have the drug. And also, if you're measuring bedside manner in regards to doctors, like we saw in that one IBS study, bedside manner could be a variable that you could take into consideration if the study is double-blind. So these are things to consider in this regard. So let's kind of take a look at this graph here. So this comes from that Harvard study that I mentioned in regards to IBS. So if we're able to completely eliminate knowledge, and where we want to kind of get with this, what I've been talking about a little bit few seconds ago, if you eliminate the knowledge, if you don't, then, and somebody has a reaction to a particular medication, you don't know if it's the placebo-nocebo effect or if it's actually the medication. If you have treatment given where they know about it, you can measure that and say, okay, this is where if they know about the side effects. If they know about the side effects, then we can measure that outcome. Then, if you completely eliminate knowledge, and you're like, okay, let's give it to people who don't know about the side effects. What happens with that? Or let's give it to people who don't know that they have the drug. Do they feel just as good as the people who know that they have the drug? So having these type of studies give for stronger data. So in performing drug studies, knowledge is a variable that has to be removed. So double-blind studies remove that knowledge and generate stronger treatment results for your overall conclusions in your data. So, placebo versus nocebo. Just to kind of wrap it up, this is a bit of a shorter one because there's a lot of information available, and I'll show you all my sources on one of the last slides. They're used in scientific drug studies, and it validates the effect of a drug. So if you give the double-blind study and you have people that are taking a sugar pill versus the actual drug, you can measure and say, okay, people who took a sugar pill, they're going to think, well, they don't know for certain they have it or not, but if they feel 20% better, and then you have people who take the actual medication compared to the placebo are like 60% better, that's substantial. But if they're both about the same, then you're like, that's not substantial. If they both are only 20% better, then that's not a substantial improvement. So you want much higher with the group who has the drug than the ones who don't. So people feel the placebo effect is essentially people feel that they are better. Nocebo, the side effects, negative effects. What if my symptoms worsen? And the health issues are related to expectations. So if they know about the side effects, there's studies that show they're more likely to report side effects than those who don't know the side effects in general. So again, double-blind studies help with that. And this can affect the side effect data overall in reporting for a particular drug. So it's important to have well-designed studies to address these things. So, placebo effect is substantial. We can see it. If you remember I Love Lucy, Vitamin. That's actually quite a funny episode. So the placebo effect is substantial. Homeopathy and alternative medicine rely heavily on this placebo effect, and all of the expectations are linked to the feeling of wellness. There's no actual drug interactions happening in regards to these sorts of things, and this has been going on for years. This has been going on for a long time. So when we see with homeopathy and alternative meds, the placebo effect is substantial. People continue to take these things because they genuinely do feel better, but it's psychosomatic. There's no actual drug interaction, and there's something to be said about that, and that's why these particular types of things are still in business, because people do feel better to a degree. But it's important to understand that. And so I thought this was a pretty funny joke here from XKCD in regards to placebo and nocebo. We've designed a double-blind study trial to test the effect of sexual activity on cardiovascular health. Both groups will think they're having lots of sex, but one group will actually be getting a sugar pill. So I thought that was pretty funny. It made me giggle. But double-blind studies, including not telling participants they have or don't have the drug, reduces the chances of having skewed data. Not disclosing side effects reduces the chances of nocebo effect. And then we also see that alternative medicine and homeopathy rely on these effects in order to stay in business. So, let me show you my lovely, all of my different websites and papers that I've checked out. Let me see if I can get that, if it'll go. You can go, and there's so much information on this. Science Daily has a website based just on nocebo, but I really like Ben Goldacre's site, badscience.net, if you haven't checked that out. All bow before the might of the placebo effect. It is the coolest, strangest thing in medicine. He's got a great book, the Bad Science book. If you've not checked it out, he goes into great detail about that. His whole job is based on medical science. The SmithsonianMagazine.com site has the nocebo effect information on that. HarvardMagazine.com has information in regards to placebo and Kapchuk and his work. The New Yorker gets into a more tongue-in-cheek column or article about Kapchuk's work. Then there's articles based on the placebo effect that you can search. If you want direct links to them, I can give them to you on Twitter in regards to the studies of IBS research and in regards to the prostate drug that I had mentioned, and then all of the images I've gotten, I've found on Google searches for images, so it's pretty straightforward and easy to kind of find this. So at this time, I want to take a moment to thank all of my patrons on Patreon. I'm currently doing a pledge drive for cancer research as well as scientific literacy. So all of my $1 patrons for the entire month of September, all of that money is going to be donated to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. So if you have $1 a month, everything I do here is free for the public, and this is the only job I have right now, so I'm working really hard to try to be available for scientific literacy, to generate content for people to use in their classrooms as well as universities and anywhere in the world. So I want to thank my patrons who have jumped on board from the very get-go. I have special rewards just for them on my Patreon account, and I hope that at some point I will be able to travel the U.S. and the world and go to people's classrooms and go to universities and be able to interact with individuals, and not necessarily educational institutions. I can come to various conventions and to be able to spread the joy that is science in a very easy type of way that's highly engaging. So that's the goal. So hopefully I will see you guys around on that. And you can find me. That's been the Placebo. What is my credentials? I have 4 degrees. I have a Master's of Arts in Teaching, specialized in secondary science education. I can teach 3 subjects. I can teach chemistry. I can teach biology as well as physical science. In any of those courses that overlap, I'm certified to teach all 3. I also have a Master's of Science in Chemistry. I have 2 undergrads in science, 1 in biology, 1 in biochemistry. I have a paper that's going to be published soon in it's Theranostics, I believe, on the work that I've done in cancer research. I don't have a PhD in patients. I'm hoping soon to be in a PhD program, but I may have to wait a little bit because it's kind of late in the semester, but we'll see. But I do have 4 degrees and able to teach science, secondary science education anywhere in the world right now. So if you want to find me, you can talk to me anywhere. These are all the places you can find me. I'm currently reinvesting all of my Patreon money into a website called Scientist Mel, scientistmel.com, and I'm going to be working on an audio podcast soon called Hey Scientist Mel, which is associated with my hashtag. So if you have questions, you can hit me up on Twitter, my patreon.com/scientistmel. I'm Scientist Mel everywhere except for YouTube, Science Email. And I'm also on Facebook. So you can find me anywhere and talk to me and ask me your questions, and I will direct you to reputable sources. And hopefully I will have a new audio podcast soon within the next few weeks. So if you can, I'm looking for $1 a month patrons, and for the entire month of September, not only am I contributing to scientific literacy, but I also want to contribute to the scientific research. Do I have any comment on the Google memo and anti-science response? The week that the Google memo thing came out, I had, actually a few days after it came out, a few days before it came out, I actually did an entire episode on the science of women in STEM. And I talked about coding a bit and the problems associated with engineering. So can I comment on it? I will direct you. What I can do, if you're on Twitter, I can find you, and I've commented heavily on it on that account, and I can direct you to what my comments were in regards to that, and as well as research that kind of goes against what was found, what that person mentioned in that Google manifesto. There's a lot of research that goes against what he says. So, but I will leave it at that. But thank you so much. And if you have any questions, hit me up there. I also have email available through my WordPress site. And I write a lot. I have a lot of information on my WordPress site as well that's available to you in blog forms. I've written pieces on free speech, depression, Wonder Woman films, what it's like to be a woman in STEM, that sort of thing. So, and I'm working on another piece soon, hopefully to have next week. Oh, you don't use Twitter. It'd be more interesting to eat more. Okay, well, if you go through my broadcast, you will see that I have the science of women in STEM. It was literally the show right before this one. So you can look at that and see the studies that I quote in regards to women's representation in engineering and computer science. So I hope that helps. Okay, no problem. And I also have a YouTube channel if you're a YouTuber as opposed to a Periscoper. So it's all good. Yay! And I follow back on Twitter and Periscope so we can engage and talk and interact and learn things together. And I'm excited to be here, and I'm grateful for those of you who continue to show up and contribute to my Patreon as well as interact with me on Twitter. I'm here for you, and I want to be able to answer your questions. So, you guys have an awesome Saturday, and I'll see you guys around. Bye!